Good evening and welcome to the first of two Inside Government shows brought to you by CU Community College that are broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, as well as ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, as well as 89.1 WIN, the radio station of the college. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. When the 2020 census was complete, the process of redistricting occurred, and with that, the political map of CU County changed. Instead of two members of the Assembly, CU saw one swapped out for two new representatives, but we do have Assemblyman John Lemondes, elected in 2020, in as the one constant in the Assembly for CU County, and he continues to represent CU County, the city of Auburn, the towns of Brutus, Cato, Conquest, Mentz, Owasco, Senate, and Troup, as well as the towns of Skaneateles and Spafford, but he did lose parts of lower CU County, and we'll get to all that at some point, but more importantly, we've asked him to come in to talk about the New York State budget, to give us an update on how he's getting acclimated to his new district and what is on the agenda for the GOP conference. Welcome back to the studio. Great to see you.
Great to be here.
First of all, how are you and your family? Everybody doing well?
Everybody's doing well. We're waiting for our senior to graduate and go to college.
Very exciting. Very exciting for her or very exciting for you?
For everyone.
Okay. So what is she going to do?
We don't know exactly yet.
Okay.
That's changed several times, but right now she is...
When they're 18, that is acceptable.
She is pursuing, at least initially, her undergraduate in business.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of things, but let's talk about the new district for you. Picked up some of CU County, but you lost parts of CU County. So what did you pick up?
So picked up, if you look at the map, essentially north and east of Auburn, to make it simple.
Right.
And then Western Cayuga is gone. So the travesty here is Cayuga now has, instead of 2 assembly members, it has 3. And so Cayuga is split 3 different ways now.
And how are you getting to know your new constituents?
Yep. Same. Going to as many things as I can. For example, I was just in Cato last night at a library, and was able to give them some very much needed library funding aid, and that was wonderful. I love doing that. It's a great way to help the community, and all of the standard things, of course, starting to get more active in Finger Lakes Radio, and all constituent liaison things that you would expect.
So other than constituents maybe changing slightly, the issues for CU County, what David Gould and the CU County legislature talked to you about are still the same issues for CU County.
Yeah, same for Onondaga. That hasn't changed.
And we'll get to this at the end, but this could change at a future date. But we'll leave that as a teaser to the end. But what we want to talk about is the budget.
Sure.
So Governor Hochul, about a little over a month ago, presented a $227 billion budget. That's with a B. Where is the legislature right now in reviewing it?
So we have been reviewing and listening to stakeholder groups for the last couple weeks, and our Ways and Means Committee is negotiating feverishly, and our leadership is as well. Right now, we expect hopefully not too many more changes, but the biggest thing here is the amount of money, the increase again. This is our 3rd largest budget 3 years in a row. And let me put that in context for everyone. 3rd largest budget 3 years in a row. Simultaneously, our population has continued to decline, and we've captured the highest outmigrating state with respect to population now 2 years in a row. So our population is decreasing, our spending is increasing, and that's a burden that is falling on each household. And I guess one of the biggest things, maybe you were going to get to it, but I want to just make sure I put it out there for everyone, is the budget so far has not addressed inflationary impacts on families and businesses.
So let's take this piece by piece.
Yep.
Let's talk about the 227 first. Yep. Now, there's a 227, again, with a B for billion.
Right.
Does that include aid from the American Rescue Plan or COVID-related, or is that money all done now?
When you say all done, what do you?
What I say is
that's
that
does
that inflate the budget? The worry being that you spend, not you, I say you, the state of New York, spends this money, the money disappears where it was a revenue, and then you either have to cut those programs or increase taxes to cover that length. So I guess at some point the rescue money is going to run out at some point. So are we at a point right now where it is running out?
So let me address that this way.
Okay.
We're at a very, I would say, dangerous point right now with this budget. Specifically on your question, we are about to see, and I hope it doesn't happen, but I think it probably is going to. We're about to see an unfunded requirement passed on to our counties, and for Medicaid.
Okay,
for
so
Medicaid.
explain that one in particular.
So what is happening is the governor is going to intercept the federal money, and that money was provided in order to reduce the pressure on the counties. And so whatever she applies that to, what that will create is, and I'll stick specifically we could talk about the whole state at 626
but for local
million. But for us locally, the impact on Cayuga is almost 2 million, and the impact on Onondaga is a little more than 13 million unfunded, which will put the only way this puts the legislatures of the two counties in a terrible prisoner's dilemma. And the only way out of it for them, I think, unless somebody can pull a rabbit out of their hat, is to raise taxes, property taxes.
So as you know,
yeah,
local governments,
yeah,
Onondaga County, Cayuga County, they pass their budgets in December.
Yeah.
So is this going to impact the remainder of their 3 quarters, or will this go into effect, if it went into effect, in 2024 for them? So are they left high and dry for 3 quarters of a budget already because they were counting on this money?
I don't know, without knowing if the governor's actually going to do it or not.
Okay.
I don't know how to.
So
she might not.
Okay. So how can she arbitrate? I guess my question is: this is block grant money. Am I correct? This is many years ago, before you were in the legislature. This goes back 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
The state changed the formula. In many states, it used to be the state pays half, the federal government pays half.
Right.
New York, in its wisdom, changed it to be half federal government, a quarter state of New York, and a quarter of the local communities.
Yeah.
That was getting out of hand. Property taxes were going through the roof.
Sure.
20 years ago, they changed that formula.
Yeah.
So one would have thought that only increases would still be the responsibility of the state of New York, because the state determines what programs are allowed and aren't allowed, correct? A county can't say, well, we're not going to do this program all of a sudden.
Right. I mean, that's where I come back to my statement on the prisoner's dilemma. It leaves them with the responsibility. If the governor does this, maybe she won't. I hope not. It leaves them with the responsibility of coming up with the difference. And again, between the two counties, that is, almost $15 million.
But that is in her budget proposal.
It is.
Okay. So let's talk about the budget proposal itself. Is there anything in the budget you like?
Some of the agricultural funding. I was concerned about the one particular line for Cornell funding that reduced the labor, the technical labor person, or it was $400K to $200K, and that was an advisory position and an advisory function. I hope that's restored.
For extensions.
Yeah, for extensions, because those are critical. The bottom line is, I think and I hope Cornell's going to do pretty good, because their work, the extension services they provide, all of the research that they conduct helps our state enormously. And I think that most people don't realize how integrated Cornell is with respect to everything that we do agriculturally. And although all businesses are important, people, the average person, I would bet, doesn't realize that agriculture is our state's #1 economy, and it's this district's #1 economy with respect to sector.
So I'm assuming by picking out one item specifically, there's a lot in the budget you don't like.
There are a lot of things I don't like.
All right, give us some examples.
So As I said when we first started, there was no direct address of inflation impacts on individuals and families. There are probably going to be more tax increases on businesses, more regulations. There are probably going to be more fees. And when I say fees, I'll just give you an example of one, just to illustrate the point. When we can't tax, we fee in New York. And the snowmobilers' fee, for example, is increasing. And so that is softened by more aid for snowmobile trail maintenance in localities that do that. I still don't think it's the right thing to do because it will chase people away, and as you continue to feed to death people, primarily sportsmen, any sportsman is very sensitive to this because what's next? Is it going to cost $150 to get a fishing license? Is it going to cost $150 to get a hunting license? Hopefully not. So there are many aspects that that I'm not fond of. An expected 1.6 billion in tax increases, for example.
So let me give you a couple of examples that I've read through the budget.
Yep.
And news stories. I shouldn't say I read the budget. So a couple of pieces that are in there. So there's this whole issue of menthol cigarette ban, and we'll get to that in a second. But one of the items in the budget is to increase the tax per pack from $4.35 to $5.35. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I think for a guy that is not fond of taxes, this is one that I think is good.
Why?
Because we have to do everything possible to get people, especially children, and I think the purpose behind this particular tax is to not incentivize children to smoke.
Okay.
And so I think this is this is the first time I've probably said for any tax that I think it's good. We have to do everything possible to disincentivize people, especially children, from ever starting and adults from quitting.
So one of the other pieces of this is the issue of menthol cigarettes, and this has kind of created some really interesting divisions within the state. So the idea is that if you ban menthol cigarettes and vaping, that will deter people from taking up the habit.
Sure.
First of all, do you agree with that?
I'm a staunch anti-smoker of anything. I don't know the science behind it. I've read the same thing. Okay. I suspect it's true, but I couldn't tell you scientifically.
But she's proposing that with that premise that it will deter. So you have one side, it's some health advocates who are saying this will deter people, but you have convenience store owners who say this is just going to drive people to an underground market. You have black faith leaders who are also against it because they think it will disproportionately impact their populations. Mm-hmm. Where do you come down on that particular, or have you given any thought on that particular issue?
Most of my orientation on this was the discouragement of children and young people in general from starting. And as I understand it, if you deny access to the flavors, various types of flavored products, then fewer children will start to begin with. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But the other argument here, and the other point that's critical to make, and if you'll give me just a second, I want to raise it. Here we're talking about raising taxes to discourage cigarette use, to discourage tobacco use. Yet at the same time, the legislature passed this marijuana bill that is in all effect encouraging people to use marijuana as much as possible, and not just legalize it. The amounts that you can have in your home, the amounts that each adult can be in possession of. This makes no sense whatsoever. And I actually said this to one of the smoking cessation groups. I said, how can you possibly advocate stopping people from smoking and that tobacco is bad, yet the use of marijuana when you're smoking it is okay?
Are you surprised at how long this has taken to roll out the licensing? I know there's some questions here in Cuyahoga County, how long this has taken to either set the regulations or hand out licenses. Again, I know where you stand on this particular position. But this does not sound like the state has had its act together at all.
No, I don't think the control board is functioning yet as it's supposed to be. And again, I'm not a part of that.
No, but but there are expectations of revenue to the state.
There are.
That won't be met.
Correct. And that was the basis of the passage of the law, was that it was going to save or help save New York State because of the revenue generated. And I think, again, I go back to the Colorado studies. Colorado has 5 years of hard data on us. And the doctors my caucus talked to said everything in Colorado post-legalization indicated this was a bad decision to make. And one of the biggest ones, and I'll be quiet on the point, let me just put this out. One of the biggest ones was you can't have the revenue discussion without recognizing the cost. And so any business owner, anyone that works at a business understands that revenue is one thing, but you have to know your costs.
So I'm assuming you voted against this.
I did.
Okay.
I did.
I want to go back to tobacco for a second.
Sure.
Again, I've done many shows on smoking here.
Yeah.
Avid non-smoker. Are you stunned? We are now 57 years after the Surgeon General's report, and we're still having this discussion.
Let me tell you, and I'm going to quote myself in my debate on this bill. When you're going into the parking lot where we park in Albany, there's a billboard that while this bill was being debated, there was a sign that says cigarette smoking causes 16 types of cancers. And I raised this and I said, are you telling me that cigarette smoking causes 16 types of cancers, but marijuana smoking won't? And I got the deer in the headlights look. This is a public safety nightmare. I think it's something we should all be concerned about. I think we're going to see exactly what states that have already legalized have seen. We're going to see higher accident rates. We're going to see higher children and adolescent emergency room visits. We're going to see death rates on the highways.
No, I understand that, but I'm talking about just tobacco. That we're still having a debate about legalized tobacco in New York.
Right. No, that doesn't surprise me.
Okay.
I mean,
there's a lot of budget items. I don't mean to skip ahead, but there's one item that the governor's proposing is $800,000. That's 800,000 new low-income housing units or housing units. First of all, do you support that plan?
In general, no. And the reason is, but there's a caveat here. The reason is because she is talking about simultaneously throwing out locality zoning laws.
So there's a question here about changing so that you would not have environmental and zoning rules apply to this type of. There would be an exemption, a carve out for them. Yeah. And is that the sole reason to oppose it?
It's one of the main reasons to oppose it. And I want to go to the caveat. We have one right here, Senate Meadows, $15 million. Some of the units are set aside for people needing assistance and veterans.
It's a relatively new housing facility on Genesee Street.
Yes.
Okay.
It's an incredible facility. I think it's going to be a great addition to our community. But that particular facility has been in the works for a while.
And had to check all the boxes.
Yes.
Environmental,
had to
zoning, planning, all of those.
Yes.
That may not be the case for these others.
That is my understanding, and that's what I don't think ever usurping lower authority is the right thing to do. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Is the governor banning or proposing banning gas stoves and appliances?
She's trying to.
Is it in the budget as a policy or as a budgetary issue?
It has been going back and forth. Where it is today, I hope that we see it come out completely, because I don't want people to. When this first came out, people went crazy, because you're essentially telling them any new construction, all electric, no more gas infrastructure, and this has incredible impacts on us locally here with respect to energy use, type of energy use, ability to have redundant energy sources in a place that's very, very cold. And I
just go outside. Is that what?
yeah, yeah. So I don't think.
So
it's
I
the
guess
right
my question is, and I don't mean to make light of this, but it sounds like when I read it, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm going to ask Senator May the same question. It sounded like this was going to go into effect within 2 years. Is that what's being proposed?
Yes, on new construction, as I understand it.
Okay, all right.
That doesn't mean you and I are going to get rid of our gas stoves that are currently in our home.
Yeah, it's not asking anybody to pull them out.
It's not retroactive.
Just
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
There are other pieces of the budget. One, school aid.
Yes.
There's a, lack of a better term, a gigantic increase this year. As I understand it, is part of the third year of dealing with the lawsuits of giving funding. I didn't say the word fair, but funding to districts. Am I correct on that? So it's a large increase.
It's a large increase.
Traditionally, what has occurred is the legislature, I'm not saying the minority has supported this, or maybe in many cases I think it has, traditionally the legislature then adds on more spending and says to districts, not only are you getting X, we're going to give you X plus 2.
Yeah.
Do you still think that is a possibility in this budget that's being proposed?
I'm not. I don't know. I say I don't know because it's changing daily, and I don't know where we're going to land on this in the next 2 weeks.
But you're really close on. It sounds like both houses, and it may not include the minority view, but it sounds like both houses are close on the estimates on revenue. They're not diametrically opposed, which they have been in the past.
Correct.
So that usually then says, well, let's do some more spending. They're higher than the governor's estimates.
So I think this comes back to, and you've heard me say this many, many times, it's always easier to spend somebody else's money. And in a state like ours, where our population is declining, our spending is increasing, I think it's irresponsible.
So we are now. Today is the 7th of March. You've got about a little over 3 weeks to adopt the budget. Do you think, first of all, you will adopt it on time?
I don't see any reason why we won't.
Is it important to do so?
I think it's critically important. I think
Why?
budgets, because the longer that a budget goes unresolved with any continuing action, continuing resolution, you're holding everything at bay, and it makes everything harder thereafter. So when you're budgeting anything, it's really critical to be timely about it. That's my opinion. I think win, lose, or draw, the people of the state deserve to know what their budget is the day that it's due.
And you're obviously in a minority. I think the numbers are, for your house, you're about 2 short of being able to sustain a gubernatorial, 48 members of the 150-seat legislature. What impact can you, and I would say this for the same with Republicans in the Senate, what impact can you have on the budget?
So that's a really good question. I'll tell you what many of us do. Many of us constantly and consistently, starting in November, December, gather all the information that we can from constituent groups in our district to see what their needs are and to include them on sponsorship letters to the governor, as well as negotiating through our Ways and Means, our Ways and Means team. And I think that that is effective in letting the governor know how many, if she sees a letter that's bipartisan that says, hey, Cayuga County needs $10 million for water restoration, that might be something that is really important. So there are there are bipartisan issues like that go forward.
So when you can help a library in Cato, is that what you're saying?
Or anything like that, yes, of
but
course.
putting priorities that may not have a partisan bent on them.
Correct.
They're just, this is what this community needs, and there's bipartisan support for that.
Yes, and I think that has been effective. It's not 100%, but you can't do nothing. I mean, if you do nothing, of course, why would you expect something to come your way if you don't do anything to impact it?
One of the items that's been in the budget process, at least for the last 3 governors, has been this issue of policy, where the governor can put policy in there and you almost don't have a say on dealing with the policy unless you reject parts of the budget. Where are you in your conference on this issue of policy versus line items that say, okay, $200,000 for the technical assistant at Cornell Cooperative Extension?
Yeah. So you have to ask everybody individually.
I'm going to, or at least as many as I can.
Where I am is it just depends on if it's a deal breaker issue or not.
Okay.
If it's something really, really important to the people here that was either included and should not have been, or was excluded and should have been, then I would vote against that.
So one of the items that will most likely end on this because of time is last week, 2 weeks ago, I saw 2 interesting news stories on the same day. One was this felony Lang gang, and was arrested in Syracuse, I think, stealing money from $20,000 from Empower Federal Credit Union. Person was arrested. They were let off on bail. And then the same day, an attempted murder, that person was booked and released the same day. For somebody from the outside, this doesn't make sense of how in 2 different cases we're talking about $20,000 from a corporation, a company that's repeated arrests, and then the same with somebody who's attempted murder. Tell me what's going on.
Well, I think this goes back to the central issue of the bail reform laws that were passed a couple of years ago. I mean, the Albany's view on this is there's no consequences for anybody perpetrating crimes. You couldn't be any farther from what's necessary to keep a society safe. That's government's number one role, is to keep its people safe.
But you do agree that cashless bail was an issue several years ago?
Yes.
Okay. So what would you do differently from what is currently being done? What would you and your fellow conference propose be done?
I think, number one, there has to be some modicum of stringency with respect to judicial discretion, with respect to whether or not the crime committed would further endanger people, or if the person committing the crime could further endanger that community. You know, for example, I go to, as an example of that, the murder that was committed in Gloversville in June, where a elderly man in his mid-70s was lured outside. They lit his, I don't know if you heard this or not, they lit his shed on fire to get him outside. He came outside to investigate the shed burning and was murdered. And that guy was out scot-free.
So with what the governor, because we have less than 30 seconds here, with what the governor, because there is a policy piece in here, the governor is put into the budget a policy piece on bail reform.
Yes.
Do you agree with what she's proposing?
I don't think it goes far enough.
Okay.
So.
But is some loaf better than no loaf?
Always.
Okay.
Always. It's a step in the right direction.
Okay. Love to have you back in. 30 minutes goes very, very quickly for all these shows. Our guest has been Assemblyman John Lemondes, who represents new parts of Cuyahoga County, but has represented Cuyahoga County for some time. We thank you for your time and hope you'll come back in the fall to give us an Albany update at that point. We'll be back in just a moment with Senator Rachel May, who will give us a different perspective from a different house in the Senate, and as she represents all of Cuyahoga County now. We'll be back on Thursday. We'll have the new head of Cuyahoga County Economic Development Agency, CEDA. Michael Miller will be in to talk about his new position. And we'll also get an update from Cuyahoga Community College President Brian Durant. In the coming weeks, our guests will include Cuyahoga County Legislative Chairman David Gould, Cuyahoga County Sheriff Brian Skank, Cuyahoga County District Attorney Brittany Antonacci, City Manager Jeff Daggert, Father Vasil Kopelnik of the St. Peter and Paul Ukrainian Church, and Film Director Locke Phillips. We'd like to let you know that you can send us your questions or ideas for guests at COZGUYTHO for either Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. Thank you for watching. Stick around for an interview with Senator May.